Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today to Getting Over the Hump, how to expand your stalled virtualization deployment. So we've got some good content, I think, for you today. To start with, let me introduce today's presenters. First up today will be Stephen Elliott. So Stephen Elliott is the Vice President of Strategy here at CA Technologies. So Stephen is working for the Virtualization and Automation business unit. So we're very much focused on key areas of business unit technology. Stephen's working on strategy creation, working with the marketplace, working with our own internal people, trying to figure out what we can do to help our customers do things like get over the hump and get over virtual stall. Previously, Stephen's got a very storied history in IT, a very well-respected industry analyst at IDC. Before that at the Hurwitz Group, at Gartner, at Forrester. He's also served with a number of vendor organizations in product marketing, also venture capitalist organizations, with a BA from the University of Southern California and graduate work. So Stephen will kick off the session today. Just so you know who I am, after Stephen speaks, I'm Andy Mann, the VP of Product Marketing for the virtualization products here at CA. I've also spent much time as a research analyst, about 5 years in the research analyst field with Enterprise Management Associates. Did a lot of in-depth work defining and analysing the virtualization market, and especially with a focus on management. Prior to that, I've worked with a number of vendors, including BMC Software and ASG, and I worked for about 12 years actually in data centres, in IT operations and so forth. I've been published, as has Stephen, very broadly in journals ranging from the New York Times, Tech Target, Computer Weekly, Network World, and many, many more. So with that, I'd like to introduce Stephen Elliott to come up and start to talk about the issues that are facing us today around getting over the hump in virtualization deployment. Stephen.
Thanks, Andy. All right, well, it's great to be here. Let's get a sense of the audience really quickly. How many folks are current CA Technologies customers? Great. How many folks are really associated in terms of virtual admin on the server side? All right, perfect. Well, we're really excited that you're here. I appreciate your time. And we're going to talk a little bit here quickly about some of the things when you talk about virtualization management and you look at all the key challenges that we're facing here, not only as an industry, but as individual IT organizations. You hear about the private cloud, you hear about public cloud discussions. All these key scenarios, you're hearing about M&A on a daily basis in tech right now. We're going through a lot of change, and there's lots of excitement here. The challenges present opportunities. And so as we've sort of seen, as Andy, as myself, we've seen over the past 5-7 years the adoption of virtualization accelerate. You've seen the adoption of management challenges start to come to fruition. We've seen this cycle before, right? Physical plus virtual, heterogeneous, complexity increasing, lots of different strategic decisions that IT organizations have to make. All these key things are really driving out what this session's really about. And so as we get into this here, we're going to talk about the life cycle. You look at virtualization maturity. We've got solutions regardless of where you are in that life cycle. You talk about tipping points. What are the barriers to success as you move from 50 to 500 to 5,000 VMs in production? What are the key challenges that you'll face as you think about managing an end-to-end service that maybe that transaction's running across virtual and physical, maybe even extending to the mainframe? Another key point here is actionable approaches, right? So at CA, we really like to guide customers through this journey because we have experience doing it before. We've seen a lot of different instantiations of these problems in the mainframe side, on the physical side. Now we're seeing, again, a recurrence of this on the virtual side as customers start to talk to us and as we work together to really execute private cloud strategies and even help customers navigate the waters of deciding on public cloud and how do you manage all these different challenges. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about wrap up and have time for Q&A. So we'll go through some of these really quickly. Clearly, as you've seen, that's why you're here. That's why you've adopted VMware. That's why you've really thought about virtualization as an architecture. This drives a lot of cost savings. It drives enhanced agility. You're really starting to see how you can have business discussions around the architecture you've deployed. You're starting to understand what are the key characteristics that you have to overcome to expand out to scale your virtualization architecture. How do you get tier 1 applications onto this architecture? What are the things that you have to execute to maintain service levels? How do you get the same level of performance management? How do you execute configuration management? What about self-service and automation in the discussion? So these are all key things that are really helping customers drive agility. Another key thing we've seen, obviously, is continuity. A tremendous amount of focus around recovery and storage and migration. And then finally, ROI. This is huge in 2009. We're starting to see agility take the front seat in terms of the value proposition for virtualization. Hardware consolidation, power, rent, cooling, downtime, all the key things that really, when you start to analyze what's the value proposition of virtualization, what was it last year, what was it the year before that, and how are things changing? And what does that mean to your management strategy? How do you maintain an end-to-end service if that transaction is on virtual, if it's being required to look at different hypervisor architectures that transaction is being supported by? So these are all key things that are really driving the value proposition. Now, the other key thing we're seeing here is obviously tremendous adoption. These are analyst numbers, and we're finding that a lot of enterprises continue to move more and more towards production in virtualization. The numbers going up, continues to go up. We're seeing a lot of CIOs recognize that planning for virtualization has become more and more of a hot topic. How do you look at capacity planning? What do you do for performance management? Asking questions around how do I take advantage of the management assets I already have? Can I incorporate my virtual architecture into those physical management assets that I have? How do you take advantage of root cause analytics, performance granularity? What about configuration and problem and change management, fault management? All the processes that ITIL version 2 has described, how can you take advantage of that now that you're going to go more and more virtual? And certainly the business discussion. What are the business outcomes that you want? Sure, everybody, as a vendor, everybody has to talk about cost savings. What about cost containment over the long term? As that number of VMs continues to go up, how are you going to contain the costs of managing that architecture? So these are key questions that our customers, we're working with customers to solve, and it's certainly that virtualization continues to be a top priority for CIOs. We don't see that changing anytime soon. And in fact, as we start to work with organizations and start to talk about what are the business outcomes, or if you're a federal agency, what are the mission objectives that you have that virtualization is driving, and how does that need to be managed moving forward? So we see a lot of opportunity here in terms of how do you build, how do you move in terms of a migration, right? You've got server consolidation, which I'm sure many of you have executed on, infrastructure optimization. Maybe you've got a couple thousand VMs in production. How do you optimize that infrastructure? How do you get through the stall points? And you start to consider, well, how do I automate? Are there processes that I can orchestrate or automate to help me reduce the number of folks that are involved in a configuration management decision? How can I streamline the execution of a VM config, for example? So all these different sort of tipping points as you move through the process, you start to realize, management's a key underpinning. And if you don't have it, there's going to be some trouble. And then certainly as we start to hear about Cisco UCS, you start to hear about these next generation architectures, hardware-based but with some virtualization embedded. How do you manage that? How do you really start to take advantage of what virtualization offers? So we're seeing that this life cycle is a tremendous opportunity for customers to really think through strategically, what do you have to do to meet your business objectives, but then also tactically to realize that there are stepping stones here, and as you move from the initial consolidation project to additional projects, management can be a great way to not only save money, but contain those costs over the long term. And it's not always just about virtual, right? It's about virtual plus physical. And it's about thinking through the decisions you'll make around your hypervisor architecture. It's about thinking through how the application development process may change. It's about thinking through all these things require management. And so we're really happy that you're here because this is, again, what we're going to discuss. Now, again, the challenges around this, many of you know this, but there's lots of challenges as you virtualize, lots of opportunities to really think through the dynamic infrastructure you might choose, to consider the type of virtual architecture you have, to think through what are the real challenges around how do you control or automate a virtual architecture. How do you get more out of what you have? How do you take the skill set that you have in your staff, or maybe your existing management solutions, and take advantage of the root cause analytics or the performance thresholding, the automatic thresholding you might have? How do you take advantage of potentially even project and portfolio management? So all these key things are coming into our discussions as customers really start to think a little bit more strategically about, okay, you've got thousands of VMs, or maybe a couple hundred and you're going to thousands. What are the key management disciplines you want to execute, and how does that help you contain costs over the long term? Because again, it's not just about one or two different disciplines. This is about the service. This is about the business service, and how do you manage that service for the long term? I think we did this one. There we go. It's going. There we go. So one of the things we found customers really talking about VM stall. So as you go through the different levels of maturity, the idea of, okay, you've got some element management tools. You probably have vCenter, maybe vSphere. Maybe you're looking at other tools that VMware provides, or even other hypervisor architectures. They're great starting points. And at CU, we've seen this before. In fact, many of you think about 12 years ago, 10 years ago, Cisco was talking about network-based policy management. They talked about how network management was really a key thing, and all these element tools came out. Cisco Works is really still out there. And now we're seeing, again, a regurgitation of that, where you have the platform providers, whether it's a VMware, maybe it's Oracle, Microsoft, having element tools. So it's very much something you probably need, but it's a great starting point. It's not the end point. So that's why it's such a great opportunity here to partner. We've got a great partnership with VMware to really help complement that story from an element perspective to the long term, and really looking at how do you manage across these tipping points as the discussion goes from an individual VM perspective to really the end-to-end service perspective. And we've sort of called this VM stall, really inability to overcome these tipping points, and you really need to move forward so that you can continue to build out and scale your virtual architecture. So these, again, are some numbers. No surprise here to this audience. Clearly, 15 to 25% of workloads running in virtual architectures, 34% of total server infrastructure, virtual servers, 38% mission-critical business services, and then 30% of servers are virtualized on average. So again, these numbers continue to go up. We hear customers saying, geez, as I put more and more critical workload onto virtual architecture, I better manage this thing. Risk goes up, business risk goes up, job risk goes up. You've got to have the performance. You've got to understand the different nuances of how do you support this architecture, and then start pushing the thinking around, well, how do I incorporate what I already have with the data that I can collect, and then what are the analytics I can put around it to drive the best assurance, the best performance. So why does this matter? Clearly, we're looking at really getting more out of virtualization. Enabling the cost metrics that you put forth in your business case, getting scale out of the cost analysis that you put forth, or really even re-upping, saying, geez, I'm going to have more virtual machines next year. What does this mean to my management overhead? How can I maintain the costs so that as the number of VMs go up, I don't have to hire more people, I can get more out of what I have? So do that through the technology, through the management layer. Also, we're seeing as these tipping points, as these VM stall discussions continue to propagate, how do you leverage your virtualization investments? If you have a virtual computing team, you've got virtual infrastructure managers, you've got all different types of scenarios that really require a deep depth in how you manage it. And then certainly you want to become more agile. You don't want to leave money on the table as you virtualize, as more and more critical workload gets on this. You want to take advantage of how do you get the business outcome that you want. So certainly a couple key themes: visibility, getting more visibility out of your virtual architecture. Control, how do you maintain and manage the control of that virtual architecture as it scales? And again, it's not just a server discussion, a storage discussion, a desktop discussion. It's about the service. This is about the business service. And you've got to have coverage over all these disciplines and integration to really get to that service level. Assurance, maintain performance, build that trust throughout the organization. And then certainly automation. How do you automate certain processes? Think about self-service in this new dynamic data center. And with that, I want to hand it back to Andy Mann. He'll go into some of the details about what we just talked about.
Great. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thanks, Andy.
So that's and the way we wanted to set this up was that Stephen's a strategic guy, looked at the problems, looked at the outcomes. I'm more of a product guy. I've had the history in the data center, so I want to give you some ideas about exactly how you go about dealing and using visibility, control, assurance, and automation to actually get over these tipping points and actually do some work within your enterprise. So I'm going to use a bunch of screenshots. Now, obviously, I'm from CA Technology, so the screenshots that I have access to are all CA products, but I'm not pushing products here. These could be from a number of different vendors. There's some uniqueness I'd like to think we have, but well, like I said, I'm not pushing product here, but I want to show you what the sort of things I think are important. When you think about visibility, for example, one of the first things you need to be able to do is to discover and record your virtualization deployments. Okay, there's a lot of detail hidden inside virtualization, where things are deployed, how they're configured, and so having insight to be able to discover and map and record where all your virtualization deployments are is a part of the first step of overcoming the challenge. You can't manage what you can't see, okay? So being able to understand IP addresses, where they're deployed. I had an interesting discussion online a while back, and someone was saying, look, I've lost my server. I need someone to help me find my server. I know physically where the boxes are. I just don't know where the VMs are, and because they distribute around the place. So being able to find things, map them out, what applications are running where is the very first thing you need to do. So having deep discovery, having visibility not just into the guests, where what the VMs are is important, but where they're running, especially when you start to think about hybrid cloud, and we look at things like VMware's Service Director, the ability to move workloads to an external cloud, to be able to know exactly where the hosts are and where the guests are and how they interact, because that's actually really critical when it comes to understanding performance. So being able to see, for example, what disks are being used, what physical resources, to Stephen's point. Because don't forget, 100% of virtual infrastructure runs on physical infrastructure. There's still a physical environment you need to understand if you're going to be able to control that environment. And it's not just systems either. You need to understand about applications. So when you're thinking about where is my environment, I need visibility into my environment. So I think about systems, I think about storage and networks. I definitely think about applications. Stephen mentioned it's not just about the VMs, it's about the service. And when you start to think about composite applications that are multi-tier, that are across multiple boxes, having the insight into what applications are running where, tracking which virtual machine is on which host, which applications are on which virtual machine, you can start to get the reportability that the line of business needs. When they come to you and say, my machine's running slowly, then you can say, well, no, it's not, and I can see exactly the storage, the network, the application, the server that it's running on. And so you can see, applications installed on virtual machines, not just virtual machines themselves. This visibility question is actually really critical. And when we talk to our customers, it's one of the first things they tell us is, I need to get visibility into my environment because I just can't manage it. And I mentioned systems, hosts, guests, applications, but as Stephen said, it's about the whole end-to-end service. So we've got databases. You need to understand how databases and middleware and networks and storage and security and applications and servers and hosts and guests all interact, because that's your end-to-end service. If you don't have visibility into any one of these parts, then you're going to be missing a key link in the chain of how to manage that end-to-end service. So being able to understand all of these details and get visibility, discovery, map it all out, record it, especially being able to record it as it changes. So you have things like live migration and vMotion, moving workloads around, and you need to be able to understand what happens as that workload changes. So you need this sort of deep and definable discovery and the collection of information. But by definable, I mean, what do you actually care about? And it might be something that happens in different teams. So you might have a server team cares mostly about the server and the virtual server, and they might even do some things with operating systems, maybe even middleware. But you might have an application team that cares more about the applications. A storage team, getting them all working together, but only with the information they need to know about. And that gives you efficiency gains in terms of being able to use these technologies, not just in a small virtualization project team, but more broadly across the IT management environment. And you also need to understand how these things connect with each other through configuration mapping. And now we start to think, just by the way, about best practices around ITIL, the IT infrastructure library, IT service management, connecting in with things like a configuration management database. Because when you're doing high-speed live migration, if you're doing migration especially off-site, off-prem, into a hosting provider or maybe just to your backup site, the ability to understand exactly what the configuration is really critical to being able to control and get compliance and security and performance out of that infrastructure. So you definitely need to be able to map the configurations and be able to do it in real time as they change and get that detailed level of relationship information so that you can start to diagnose problems when they occur. You can start to see where your spare capacity is. You can start to recover unused machines and recover the licenses that are being used. So you can actually start to do real cost reduction around license rationalization. And you can, using that to create these detailed inventory records, gives you a much better level of reporting, of cost control, more efficiency for people as well. Because I don't know how many people are maintaining their configuration inventory from virtualization in either vCenter, which is not really historical, or in a spreadsheet, which is already manual, or doing some scripting and reporting and very difficult error-prone operations there. And so this saves you a lot of time and effort. So, instead of having to hang around late until 9 o'clock at night just collecting and make sure your inventory's up to date, you get to go home on time. That's not to be underestimated. It's also important once to understand visibility so you can understand utilization. When we talk about virtualization and moving to virtualization, one of the biggest concerns is that you're not going to meet SLAs. And so there's a lot of business owners, to the challenges that Stephen was talking about, who don't believe you're going to be able to meet SLAs with this new technology architecture. And so there's lots of political issues there. If you've got great visibility, then you can start to show your business owners that you've got great performance. You can actually start to talk to them about how they get even better SLA outcomes from virtualization, rather than having the discussion with them about how they're scared of SLA outcomes with virtualization. Ideally, you want it to be easy to use, a nice topology view, nice and graphical, and that lets you start to get control. So the second main theme in terms of being able to overcome this VM stall is being able to get control. So visibility, because you can't manage what you can't see, and then start to take control. So things like, for example, taking control of replication, of migration, of continuity, thinking about not just physical to virtual, which is the first step in the server consolidation in the lifecycle phase, but thinking about virtual to virtual as you move machines around, live migration, taking a handle on whether you're migrating internally, what sort of security zones are you migrating into. You think about security and compliance with virtualization, and you have to understand, for example, if you've got a critical financial application and you're migrating that around a resource pool and that ends up on a physical server alongside test data, that can be a compliance problem, especially if you're thinking Sarbanes-Oxley, if you're a public company, if you're a government organization, if you're in healthcare, patient records being co-located. So get a handle on how you're migrating. Also think about virtual to physical, because that happens too. There are certainly some vendors who will not support you if your application is running on a purely virtual environment and you need to replicate the problem on a physical environment. So there are actually times you need to do virtual to physical. And of course, don't forget the high availability and continuity of the control consoles. So vCenter, for example, being able to get the high availability of that. And that becomes very important. So get control of replication, get control of migration, you can start to deliver continuity. Centralizing control as well. If you have 16 different groups managing the control of migration, then anytime there's a problem, you have that triage meeting. I don't know, hands up who's spent hours in triage meetings trying to figure out whose problem it is, regardless of trying to figure out what the problem is. So centralizing control, getting that common dashboard, getting that common look and feel. And the integration then helps you ease those skill requirements. Because, you start out with a virtualization project team, for example, and they might not be experts in storage or in security or in networks, for example. And having an integrated dashboard that gives the control over multiple areas of your IT environment, all from one console, actually helps people who may not be experts do more with that environment and get more control and being able to deal with problems faster And so you get less downtime, you're spending less money, you're spending less time in triage meetings. I mean, it's all good outcomes. You also want to go beyond just the migration and monitoring, of course. I've talked to a lot of customers. They go, monitoring's great. I want to take action. Knowing there's a problem is great. I want to fix the problem. And this is when, if you get visibility and control, you can start to get proactive. So you can do things like managing a resource pool proactively. You can do things like managing the inventory, allocating the inventory to the right applications, and making sure that you've got that level of control. You can manage organizational units appropriately. So you're assigning the right resources to the right business units. And that's actually really important when you talk about politics of virtualization and server huggers, the business owners who bought a server for their application, and they don't want to give that up. And so you might have a pool of servers that are only assigned to one business unit, but you can still virtualize as long as you do migrations within that business unit pool of resources. So you need to be able to match up organizational units with IT resources and wrap that with business policy and start to get control that way. And of course, you think about chargeback as well. You might want to start without chargeback. It can be very contentious if you're facing political issues. If politics is stalling your deployment of virtualization, chargeback is probably going to make it worse. But you can start with showback. And you can show your business owners what they would have paid if you were operating as a service unit. And you can then match that up with the response time and the level of benefit they're getting. And you can start to prove benefit and start to move away from being a tactical cost center and start to move towards being a strategic asset. And you need the flexibility to support in your control consoles multiple administrator skills. So as I said, network team, storage team, server team, all needing to use a similar set of console tool sets to control that environment, but being able to use their specific skill sets in that console to get control and bring their real skills to bear, so that network people aren't being frustrated by trying to do server tasks, and server people aren't being frustrated by trying to do storage tasks, and so on. So having that ability to manage system images of software and networks and storage in a single view is actually really powerful in terms of getting control. Once you've got visibility and you've got control, you can start to assure performance. Now, performance, service levels, are really one of the root causes of these political battles that you have to fight to try and get application owners to give up their physical hardware. Excuse me. The ability to assure them of service. Now, we use the word at CA, certainly we use the word assurance very specifically. A lot of people talk about performance. Performance is great, but performance is not necessarily good or bad, right? You can get awful performance. You don't want to make sure you're delivering performance because you could be delivering bad performance. Assurance is about assuring service. And it's not just performance, by the way. When you talk about assurance, you want to assure your business owners of compliance. You want to assure them that you're following security practices. You want to assure them that you're dealing with license and asset allocation and managing cost. So at CA and generally, I think more broadly within the industry, we use this term assurance to encompass a lot more than performance. And I think that's actually a really important point when you're talking about virtualization especially. So to get over these tipping points again, being able to provide, yes, performance is a big part of it, rich visibility. And again, it's about the whole service, end to end, not just the server performance, not just CPU. I mean, you all know from your own experience, if you try and measure just CPU in the environment, then that's actually it's a pretty pointless measure when you start to do virtualization. Physical CPU doesn't actually mean anything when it comes to the performance of the application on top of a virtual server, on top of physical hardware. And so you need to connect things together. Physical CPU is still important, but by itself it's not that meaningful. Connect it then with virtual CPU utilization. Connect it then with application response time. Connect that with network latency. Connect that with storage I/O. And now you're starting to get real visibility into end-to-end performance. And once you start to get visibility into performance, you can start to work on assuring that level of performance. So you can start to track how you're performing, what incidents are happening, and events. Now, I use those words advisedly, by the way. Incident and event. These are ITIL words. The IT infrastructure library, one of the best practices deployed by about 65% of organizations. Very important framework. Maybe you're doing it, maybe you're not doing all of it, maybe you're just doing some of it, maybe you're not doing any of it. But it's a best practice you can use to start applying ITIL best practices into the virtualization environment by tracking incidents and tracking events, understanding what causes them, understanding the root causes of these problems. Because everyone blames before virtualization, everyone blamed the network, right? So you've got a problem, oh, it's the network. How many network engineers does it take to change the light bulb? None, it's a software problem. Network engineers would blame the software team. And so you get this issue. Now it's virtualization gets the blame. Every time we introduce a new technology, it's like that technology is the problem. If you get slowdowns and you're the virtualization admin, I bet you get the call first, even though it's not actually a virtualization problem. And so getting understanding of this root cause, tracking events, tracking incidents, and getting really detailed into the context of the problem, and looking at historical, trending, and forecast. Getting real time. This is another difference, by the way, between assurance and performance. Performance is typically a historical report. You look at what the performance has been. Assurance is much more about real time and even predictive. So you know what the problem is and even what the problem will be. And that actually becomes really, really important in virtualization when you've got such a dynamic environment. So it lets you identify root causes, not just the symptom, although the symptom is important. The symptom might be slow response time for the end user, but you need to know what actually causes that. And it could be anywhere. One of the things about virtualization is it starts to bring everything together. You think about virtual networks, virtual storage. Traditional tracking techniques don't work. You need to be able to monitor the end-to-end and get real root cause analysis. And that lets you take rapid action. And now instead of you waiting for the call to say something's wrong, and by the way, that's actually very typical in organizations. In research I've seen, somewhere around 80% of problems are reported to the help desk before IT operations knows about them. Now, just think about for a moment how often you would actually call your help desk as soon as a problem happens. You don't. End users in bank branches, in retail offices, in factories, in warehouses, they don't call the help desk as soon as our application slows down. They're unproductive for minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, before they even call the help desk. So you want to be proactive about getting these responses and taking rapid action so that you're fixing problems before they're reported. And this is the sort of capability, this visibility and control lets you do that. And so, you get alarms, and alarms tell you there's a problem. You can then start to take action on them. You can triage. No more 2-hour triage meetings and finger pointing. You can go, whoop, there's the problem. And you can actually get suggested remediation actions. Use expert systems, use a knowledge base to try and record, and this is again an ITIL best practice, record the root causes, record the remediation actions, and now you're starting to let junior operators do a whole lot more work as well. One of the big problems that causes VM stall is a lack of skills. So as you're able to build skills into a system, then your junior people can do more work, they can do smarter work, your senior people can get freed up from doing basic triage events, up to doing optimization activity and doing infrastructure and doing enterprise architecture, the things that they've skilled to do. And as I said, not just historical, get real time. That's the only way you're going to get ahead of the game. Understanding this real-time analysis, what's happening right now, what's causing this issue right now. That lets you then start to really get efficient and get into that automation phase that Stephen was talking about in our maturity life cycle. I mentioned skills. If you've got enterprise architects provisioning virtual servers, then honestly, you're wasting their time. And they don't want to be doing it. They would much rather be doing really smart work, working on how to deploy new applications, how to deploy new products and services that help your business grow revenue, rather than responding and reacting to individual departments that need a new server. So think about how you can use repeatable processes Things like, I mean, provisioning is a classic, right? I mean, there's a lot of repeatable processes in virtualization. And if you've got people doing them, by the way, it's not just that it's inefficient, not just that it's dull and boring for really skilled people who you need to retain, because there are skills, there's a huge demand for virtualization skills. I did read an article in Network World, I think it was, that showed that people with a VMware certification were able to get a measurable higher salary on the market because of this skills shortage. I mean, this is real stuff. So you don't want to be wasting your people because they'll go somewhere else. But provisioning is just one of many, many tasks you can repeat. Embedding repeatable process into systems rather than using people, more efficient, helps you retain staff, helps you reduce errors as well, because people make mistakes. I've worked shift work, and if you've ever tried to provision a machine at 5 o'clock in the morning on Friday, sorry, you make mistakes. It does happen. We try not to, but we're human. Computer's not human. It does the same thing every time. So you can take that error rate out. Oh, by the way, you get audit and compliance here as well. So if you're talking about functional isolation, for example, the ability to isolate the owner of data from the person that provisions the data, for example, that's a classic case of functional isolation. These are the sorts of things that are dictated in Sarbanes-Oxley. In 404, for example, this functional isolation. HIPAA is similar. PCI is another one, being able to dictate that whoever has access to credit card numbers doesn't actually have access to the application that uses those credit card numbers. I think we all know root access is a bad thing. Giving people the access to do what they need by automating, providing repeatable templates, and letting them do it themselves. So being able to predefine what is a best practice VM for us. How do we provision it? How do we deliver the user control? Don't forget self-service, and Stephen mentioned that. If you're looking to this journey towards the cloud that VMware is talking about, that we're talking about, that you're probably talking about internally, being able to get control over resource needs, start pooling resources, start doing that show back, and as you move into a real cloud, into a service unit, into a strategic asset, start doing real chargeback. Expose the cost to the end user so they know what they're paying for, and use your assurance solutions to show them what they're getting for that money as well. Dynamically change configurations to meet business needs. So we're starting to build automation. Business policy built into automation drives better results. If you get a load spike, say you're in retail, around Christmas time, around Thanksgiving, you get a load spike in your online store, then you can dynamically reconfigure resources and get that performance. And again, all of a sudden you're delivering to business owners, you're exceeding SLA. And if you want to get over those political battles of deploying virtualization, be able to get through this VM stall, if you can exceed expectations without even being asked, you're going to get a lot fewer arguments when you go to that change approval board meeting. Scheduled deprovisioning is also important. This is the VM sprawl issue, which leads to VM stall as well. But this idea that you can schedule a deprovisioning event. So rather than having to go through your spreadsheets and go through vCenter and scratch your head and try and figure out who's using this VM, does anyone use this VM? If I turn it off, am I going to get hot phone calls? It doesn't seem to be used, but maybe it's important. Scheduling a deprovisioning event. Scheduling an email out to an end user. I'm sorry, it's the accent. Scheduling an email that goes out to the end user that says, if you don't respond within 20 days, this VM will be deprovisioned. Now that lets you start to, again, get control, regain licenses. You haven't got VM sprawl happening. So you can get licenses back, you can get physical servers back, you can get virtual machines back, and you can do it all automatically without using up these really, really skilled people. So building repeatable processes. That requires standardization, by the way. That's a big challenge on the way to virtualization and cloud. We're talking about getting over the hump of VM stall. Part of that challenge for you is going to be standardization. But you can do it. And you don't necessarily have to think about your entire end-to-end process. If you standardize 2 steps in a 50-step process, you're getting there. That gives you the foundation to standardize another 2 and another 2. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a footstep. The journey towards a fully automated dynamic data center starts with standardizing 1 or 2 processes one or two good processes, by the way. So there's no point automating bad process. So you have to understand what is my process, what is good process, think about best practices, talk to consulting and service organizations, think about analysts, think about vendors as well in terms of understanding what is a best practice. Because all these people have seen a lot of implementations and know what's good and bad. And automating maintenance, automating things like patch levels. Virtualization makes that really hard because you've got virtual machines get stood up, patched, and then destroyed, and maybe not saved. So the next time you stand them up again, you've got to patch them again before you open them up through the DMZ. So some of this automation process becomes really, really important for patch compliance as well as obviously security and other compliance. So policy checks, other regular tasks. Like I said, there's so much regular activity you can automate. Discovery, system refresh, change detection, compliance checking. I mean, I don't know how much time you spend on audit. I know a lot of people can spend a lot of time just compiling audit reports. Once every couple of months, once every 3 months, you spend a week at a time sitting down, trawling through logs, compiling audit reports. Again, you're not using your people to their full ability when you do that. It's inefficient, it's not cost effective, and they can be doing better stuff. They can be driving business advantage. And back to this idea of not just monitoring, but doing. So using automation tools to fix common problems. Again, it's about getting skills, getting people out of the process. And by the way, you're never going to get to dynamic data center and cloud if you've got people involved in routine processes. It cannot happen. I mean, you think about the definitions of cloud. On-demand self-service for end users. If you need to wait for an individual operator to patch a machine when they're bringing it up, that's not on demand. That's not self-service. So not just monitoring and alerting, but remediation itself. Okay? Not just seeing what the problem is, fixing the problem. And you can even automate assurance. So you're tying this stuff together, okay? It doesn't stand apart. The same way that your business applications are an end-to-end service, so too IT management needs to tie together. So automate the assurance process. As soon as a problem is detected, if it's a known problem, move the workload to a machine with more resources and you're done. And it's automatic and you've fixed a problem before anyone even knew about it. Okay? So this helps you build the maturity towards this dynamic self-service data center. And you think about self-service and cloud, the end user comes in through maybe a service catalog, they can select from a web server, a project server, a collaboration server, maybe it's a front office server, maybe it's a back office server. When you open a new branch, you need a local server for them. So you create the service request. Again, ITIL, best practice, service request system. Being able to create and manage those services and drive it through to an automated engine which will go and provision and orchestrate the workflow of approvals, of license allocation, of VM allocation, and all the other things that go along with creating a new service. And being able to provision that service once it's authorized and all the checks and balances are in place. Again, you've got audit control because of that. And then you can go and use your commodity hardware to provision these services. Then you can update the user automatically, tell them, yes, your service is done. If you do this well, this can actually literally happen in seconds. I mean, I don't know how long your provisioning process historically has taken. I've talked to organizations where literally 6 months to get a server on goes down to 6 minutes to get a server on. That's pretty impressive. And then you can do things like chargeback as well, because you're tracking everything that's happening. You know what resources are being used, what licenses, what bandwidth you're giving them, what storage allocation they're getting, and you can start to do showback and start to prove your value to them. Then you can deprovision according to policy as well and do it automatically. And when you think about all of these steps, and return those resources to the pool, of course. So when you think about all of these steps, if you're doing all of that, I would argue that that's actually a private cloud. And yet this is achievable. I mean, this is what I'm trying to talk to you today about. Getting over the stall of these individual management tipping points with all of this sort of capability, automating assurance, getting visibility and control, and making it all happen automatically so that you can get to the dynamic data center. And you can argue whether it's called cloud or it's not, but it's the foundation for private cloud at very least. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Stephen to do a quick wrap-up, let you know how we might be able to help, just briefly, and also take Q&A. So we'll have a microphone in the middle there, so once Stephen's wrapped up, we'll both be taking questions and answers.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks,
yeah,
Dave.
so we'll just take 1 minute. I mean, I think what we've been discussing here the past 50 or so minutes, it's about leadership, right? It's about helping customers move through the maturity cycle. As you virtualize, as you consider, hey, I got my physical infrastructure here. I don't want two separate sources of tools. I don't want to have a separate staff. I want to think through what are the intricacies of a virtual architecture. How do I manage that with the same level of execution I've done on the physical side? How can I take advantage of sophisticated technologies, root cause analytics, performance, configuration, bring some of these basic models of automation to fruition and execute more efficiently to drive more business growth? So that's really what we're talking about here. I think the other key thing is, when you talk about leadership, it's not just about tools, it's not just about hype, it's about execution. And it's not just about people, process, and technology, it's bringing these things together. So, we've really thought about that. We've listened to customers. Most recently, you've told us about how services is a key piece because there's lots of strategy around virtualization. How do you incorporate what Andy was talking about, IDLE, version 2 or version 3 process thinking into your virtual architecture? How do you execute planning for the long term as you virtualize more and more? So we went out and acquired a company, 4Base Technologies. And so these are a great group of folks that have, with some of the most cutting edge organizations out there in terms of virtual and physical discussions and cloud discussions, they've already implemented it. So we're really excited that this is the type of thinking that we're doing here and really looking forward to working with you more as this life cycle continues to emerge. And regardless of where you are on it, we've got capabilities that we can help you through the journey. So if you're just starting, you're in the middle, you're towards sort of the end of deploying a private cloud or having hybrid cloud discussions or utilizing EC2 for Amazon, we've got capabilities there. We can help you throughout this journey. So basically, I think this is the key thing here. Really ask yourself, what are you doing today in terms of visibility control, performance assurance, and automation? What are some things where you might need some help on, whether it's a services perspective or a tools perspective? And we really appreciate the opportunity, if we're not working with you yet, to really come in and work with you to meet your business objectives. So with that, I think, Andy, I'd love to sort of have Q&A. And
so there's a microphone just in the middle of the room. The reason I would ask you to use that is because this is all being recorded for people who are not able to come here. So I don't know if there's any questions at this point.
There's got to be something out there.
Yeah, please.
I know you guys said you're not trying to pitch products, but which product at CA are you most excited about in terms of managing this next hurdle?
It's not a single product. It's a new product line that I'm really excited with personally, and I'll let Stephen jump to it as well. So this is actually it. How convenient. We did not plant this question. So CA Virtual, it's actually a brand new product for CA. We developed it ourselves. It's about 4 main areas: delivering automation, which we've spoken about today. We saw some screenshots, by the way, of these products. I tried to, like I said, I tried to make them vendor neutral, but that's, they were these products. Virtual configuration, be able to track what is configured, where it's configured, and do remediation. Virtual assurance, giving that insight into the performance, the reliability across end-to-end, finding root causes of problems through storage, security, network, application servers. And CA Virtual Privilege Manager. This is about being able to get compliant around security and the root access and those privileged users. So that's actually really exciting. And that ties in with our enterprise-wide virtual plus physical management. So it's things like CA Virtual Assurance for infrastructure managers, existing customers who have things like Spectrum Information Infrastructure Manager and eHealth Performance can actually add that to get this whole level of end-to-end virtual assurance. Things like Spectrum Automation Manager, built-in process automation, really extends that automation capability into the enterprise and gives you additional capability to relieve those skill burdens and get the automation happening, which makes you efficient. ArcServe is really cool as well. It's the backup P2V migration, it's the high availability continuity capabilities, and the full enterprise-wide identity and access management. So I honestly tell you this was not a planted question, but this is the stuff that I'm really excited about. Yes, another question?
Yeah, I had a question about when you're doing onboarding, like an ORR, where does that come into play? Because usually an ORR talk about automation, automatic provisioning, usually there's multiple teams involved, security, DR, networks, virtualization team, and the application owner. Where does, that always kind of falls down for me when they talk about automatic provisioning.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, actually. And I'll just back up a couple of slides. I mean, the thing about onboarding is that it does touch lots of departments, so it's a process, right? You may have a good process, you may not, but it's so many slides. It's a process that you can automate, and we look at this sort of thing. And this is fixing a problem that's happening in assurance, but change out some of these points here to route to security for approval. Security can approve it, and then that can provide a secure way to add a user into Active Directory or add a series of users into Active Directory and put them in the right groups. And once that's done, you can route it back to storage team. And the storage team can allocate the individual storage resources, and they can approve it, or at some point maybe you can deny the request and it can go through an alternate stream. And what you see here is two alternatives, but you can have multi-function branching. I mean, this is a whole workflow. The idea behind automating is, yes, there's automated VM provisioning. And when you're talking about just provisioning a virtual machine, that's part of it. But when you're talking about a more sort of sophisticated process, you route it through automated workflows. And that's where you get a lot of this benefit. Does that answer the question?
Well, and the other key thing, too, is with this particular area.
It does answer my question, but of the automatic workflows kind of assume that you have access into your access database, access into your ticketing system, your DR plan, and everything in our organization is siloed.
That is definitely a problem.
And to get to that point is very, very difficult because everybody has their own process and procedures, and you're just the virtualization guy.
Yeah.
And they go away, we don't care about you.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons we came out with, say, virtual automation. It's just for the virtual guys. But one thing you can definitely do is use process like this to make your life easier and then talk about it. If you go to the server team or the security team and go, yeah, no, we don't need to fill out headcount because we're automating all our stuff. Ask them if they've got enough time to do everything they want to do. And that's how you can start to get buy-in. This is part of the politics discussion, right? And Stephen, you want to add something?
I was just going to say the other key thing is we see your example in most of our enterprise accounts, and one of the things that's really exceptional about this is when the specific products here were created, it was about integration, not just with CA products, with third-party products. So if you've got a third-party trouble ticketing system and you want to integrate a problem or change incident management process, as we were just describing, that data flow enables a communication level that those folks who are using those particular products that might not be CA specific, you can have a certain level of integration, and it's not just with the service desk, but we've had customers ask us to integrate with third-party monitoring tools, performance monitoring tools that aren't necessarily CA. So you've hit on what I think CA really excels on, which is, look, we go into accounts. Some accounts are lots of CA, other accounts we've got pockets of it. But the net of it is that we have to have integration not just with our own products, but with third-party products that enable, what Andy just mentioned, the communication to occur, but also enables a streamlined automated process workflow if it's a fault incident change management process, configuration management process. So we sort of help, obviously part of the onus is on IT organizations to sort of work more closely together. But this is something that CA has been dealing with since its inception.
Yeah.
I had a question. I mean, this all sounds really great, but it's really not at the application level, and the line of businesses don't give a damn about this stuff. I could see them going, well, you guys aren't giving us what we want. We have a credit card. We're going to go to the cloud direct. Could you address that?
Yeah, no, that's definitely, and at CA we talk about two different approaches to cloud. One is the evolutionary approach, and that's what we've shown today, where you evolve your own infrastructure. The other is the revolutionary approach, where the business units just go out and use Salesforce.com or ADP or whatever and they're both valid. They're both valid ways to do business. If you as an IT organization can be as efficient and as cost effective, you also have relationships with the business that maybe they don't have. They have more control over you. If they talk about not being able to get SLAs, not being able to get compliant, security is an issue in the external cloud for a lot of people. We're a software company. We sell stuff, and you can sell stuff to your business as well because you have unique differentiators. In terms of you understand the business, you understand who to work with, you understand what the priorities are. You have actually got the opportunity to sell IT as a service to your business, but until you get a lot of this happening, that's not going to happen. And I would say that you say that the business won't give a damn. One thing they'll give a damn about a lot is the assurance side and the automation side, because that gives them assurance that they're going to get what they need from you, which they often won't get out of a service provider, by the way. You have a look at Amazon's service contracts, and yeah. And so business owners are going to be very wary of those, whereas they can get a much deeper and granular contract with you. The other thing is automation, because you do have to compete. Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. You do. As an IT organization, more and more we have to compete against external organizations. And we think of IT these days as moving into a supply chain model. You think about historically the T-model Ford, every single piece of that motor vehicle was built in Ford's factory. Now you have a supply chain and you source bits from everywhere to build that car. IT's going down that journey, And so Salesforce.com might be part of your supply chain. ADP might be part of your supply chain for HR management and payroll. Google, Amazon might be part of that supply chain for infrastructure provisioning. But IT has an opportunity to own the supply chain in a way that makes sense for the business. And yeah, it's a challenge. We have to change the way we look at IT, and it does become, to an extent, a competition. Yeah.
And our customers, I think the other thing, and you correctly pointed out, that the products here, I'll give you a perfect example. Our Spectrum Automation Manager product has integration with our Wiley Intrascope application performance management solution, which is the market-leading product out there for managing virtual and physical apps. And one of the things that we're excited about is what you've seen here is key data that supports an application service. And we went out and bought 3Tera with recognizing that a certain percentage of our market, some of the leading customers recognize that, wait a minute, things might change if I consider and believe what VMware and others are talking about. In the case of VMware, it's a vApp. And you're thinking about different types of SOA-based application architectures and creating a container. This is exactly as what 3Tera does. So as we look at what you've seen here, and as a company we say, what are customers looking for in support of that type of application model, you have to have the underpinnings here to support that. If you don't have this, you're going to be out of luck, and customers aren't going to adopt it. So we're excited because this is the foundation. So as this market matures, we're starting to see, and service providers, in fact, are the leading adopter of 3Tera technology right now.
Just one thing, the other thing, we put up on this slide here, by the way, over here it says public cloud, right? Our product's actually provisioned to Amazon.com, for example. We provisioned a rack space. So even if you want to provide infrastructure externally, you can still own the management of that. Any other questions before we wrap? The door's open, which means we've got less than 5 minutes and people are going to start streaming in. Thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you.